A wander around Old Belper. We're going to spend the next few minutes wandering around Belper, as it was over the past 150 years, looking at photographs which have been recently cleaned up and digitised, mostly from the Belper Historical Society archive, with a handful from other collections, including my own. Some are old favourites, but some are newly acquired. We start at the Butts, that open space between the marketplace and the old St John's Chapel. Once it was so much larger, and it has been reported that thousands of beasts were brought and sold on this site. The annual horse fair took place at the end of October each year, gradually morphing into the coppice-based Belper Fair we know today. You can see sheep in pens and horses lined up for sale. The fine terrace at the back right was built by nailmaster John Williams Melbourne in 1829, lining the route from High Pavement to the chapel. For many years, the shop on the corner of Lander Lane was Ling's Grocers, now Sweetings, which closed in 1970 as competition increased from the modern supermarket. This photograph from the winter of 1940 shows how much snow fell on the town during what proved to be the worst winter of the Second World War. On the right is the Old Park Tavern, also known as the Corner Pin. Moving on 30 years, and Ling's is boarded up, there are trees and benches on the butts, and a major change was about to happen for the terrace. Buses and lorries were finding the turn into Lander Lane a tight struggle, so it was agreed to demolish the Park Tavern in 1970. The removal of the pub certainly enabled the turn in the road to be improved, but it was a sad loss of an attractive end terrace building. Without it, there was a view across to St Peter's Church and the cottages and Haynes Warehouse on Lander Lane. By 1970, the warehouse had been converted into the Labour Club. Both it and the cottages have since been demolished. Also on the butts, approaching Nottingham Road, was this bakery on the left, run by Thomas Bohm at the time this photograph was taken at the end of the 19th century. He was a baker, pastry cook and confectioner, and it was said that for many, a look around Belper Horse Fair began with a pie from Bohm's before strolling round the animal pens. Beyond the shop is the original St John's School, known as the National School at that time, run by the church to provide universal schooling for children. Here's a closer look at the school in August 1910. By that time, the original 1849 building had been threatened with closure for having inadequate facilities. There were too many children for the classrooms available and only one entrance, which, shockingly for the time, the boys and girls had to share. The following year, the school was rebuilt with extra classroom space and a door added at the side for girls to use. Here are all the boys before the rebuild, standing on the junction of St John's Road, or Chapel Hollow as it was better known then. They don't look thrilled at having their photograph taken. Here's something you don't see very often in playgrounds these days, a game of conkers, played by boys from St John's School in about 1945-46. Lots of concentration going on there. And here are the children of St John's again, around 1900, in the coppice, lined up for what looks more like a roll call than a photograph. At least the choice of location allows us a fine view of Manor Farm with Queen Street beyond. Beyond the coppice is the Parks, once a deer park but farmed from the 17th century until the 1960s, when it became Council Parkland. This view is from the 19th century and shows the little bridge by the brook, with children playing by the old ford, which has long since disappeared, ploughed through by a council digger to allow water a quicker exit from the park. The wall on the left gradually began to disappear from around this time, and there's no indication of it at all these days. The path on the right once led to the Lady Well, one of the finest sources of water in the town, until it was used to supplement the town's piped supply. Into the marketplace, and this is how it looked before Angel House was built on the east side in 1911. Edwin Millward's partly thatched Angel Inn stood where the number 28 Community Hall stands now, with the King's Head on the adjacent corner. Here's a better view of the buildings that were there before Angel House. By 1903, around the time this photograph was taken, the Millward Brothers Plumbers occupied the single-storey building, with butcher William Spencer next door. Joseph Haynes' grocer's shop can just be seen at the bottom of High Pavement, which was more narrower in those days. In 1897, it was estimated that about 8,000 people turned out on a sunny June day to to celebrate the Diamond Jubilee of Queen Victoria in Belper Marketplace. A high platform had been erected next to Loverock's drapery, which is now the convenience store which backs onto the Black Swan. And from this platform, several dignitaries gave patriotic speeches and music and singing followed. Here's the view in the other direction. The sun was beating down, so umbrellas doubled as parasols for the day. There was no amplification in those days, so a lot of shouting had to be done from the platform, which you can see on the far left. In the distance, just left of the White Swan, is Waterloo House. Here's a clearer view of Waterloo House, shortly before it was destroyed by fire in 1900. Milliners, the Gibson brothers, had the shop at the time. The council used the removal of the building as a chance to widen the road, and the building that replaced it, now College's Furniture Store, was built further back for better access to Church Street. Another shop, lost since then, was Loving's Ironmongers, which was partly removed many years later, again to widen the road. A new shopfront has just been created on the surviving section of the building. Moving back into the marketplace, here's a glance down King Street. It's 1956, and the new cooperative store has just been built, but hasn't yet opened. The old store frontage on the right was removed about 5 years later and replaced with concrete and glass. Today, it's a Chinese takeaway. On the left, the old Loverock's drapery was, by then, the Ministry of Pensions and National Insurance. A little further down King Street, on the right, was Green Hall, which was demolished earlier that same year. Originally built for Jedediah Strutt II on his marriage in 1810, it's seen here from the paddock on the other side of the street. The paddock later became the Memorial Gardens. The photograph was taken before the First World War, when it was a prep school for boys. Here's an event held on the Green Hall lawn. An audience gathered for a special event in the summer sunshine with raised seating at the rear. Sadly, we don't know what the event was. Lower down King Street, on the right, there's now a long range of modern shops, built in 1973. Some of the shops lost in that development are pictured here. Rowell's was a drapery store, Kerry's Barbers was in the middle, and on the far right was the Midland Hotel. Note the date, 1887, over the gate leading to the Midland Hotel car park. And these are the buildings that were there before 1887. A row of rather scruffy looking little cottages, some of them thatched. There was a draper's on site even then, Copeland's, whose sign can be seen outside their shop. One building in the middle looks to have been removed already. Other buildings further up the street will be replaced around the turn of that century. The gardens of Green Hall extended over the shops at the far right, so it's perhaps no surprise that they needed to be demolished and replaced. Below the railway bridge was the entrance to Belper Station. The station was Belper's second, built in 1878 to replace one on the edge of town, near to where Goods Road is today. This is the 1878 station shortly after it was completed, with immaculate cut lawns, white picket fencing and gas lamps along the platforms. When express trains stopped at Belper before the Beeching cuts, longer platforms were needed and they extended all the way to the Field Lane Bridge. Here's a steam engine passing under that bridge in the 1950s. Field Lane Bridge, when built in 1838, was quite narrow, as the lane was little more than a footpath. It became more and more of a problem as the 20th century passed, and it was finally widened in the 1970s. The fine stone wall was replaced with a metal sheet, which rather detracts from the beauty of the fine stone cutting below. On the far left, in this early 20th century view, you can see the illuminated sign for the railway station. Coming back to the station entrance, this is the moment that Belper's Boer War heroes returned to the town in 1901. After arriving by train, they were taken by carriage from the station to a special celebratory event in the public hall, which is now the Ritz Cinema. We're looking at this scene from an upstairs window of what is now Clark's shop on King Street, but was then Ball and Stillman's men's outfitters. Fine Fair was built over that yard in 1973 and is now Poundland. The trees on the far left are the same trees which now line the channel down the side of Poundland, and the trees at the back are those now outside the nursery behind the store. You can still get a sense of the old railway yard. Here we are in the remains of that yard in 1973. The ticket office has been flattened and you can see the shops on the other side of King Street beyond the fencing. A huge concrete platform was about to be dropped in place over the railway cutting to take the new supermarket building. Further down King Street, this 19th century view shows the sign for a music hall reached through the Railway Hotel arch. The building has had many different uses over the years, but this was one of the earliest. On the right is the old Rose and Crown pub, which was later rebuilt. Boots the chemist are there now. On the left is the old Pars Bank, which is now Leicester and Nick's. From the junction, we can see this band on parade turning into Bridge Street. The building on the far right was demolished in 1912 and the palace built on the site, described by owner Thomas Morley as an electric palace of varieties, as it had its own generator round the back from its earliest days, so it provided a mix of live entertainment and the newfangled moving pictures. Before the London and Midland Bank, now HSBC, was built in 1900, the building on the right stood on the junction with this rather fine canopy to protect its large selection of teas from the sun. That looks to be a postman with his cart standing in the middle of the road. Behind him is the Derwent Street junction, which was very tight in those days and only widened when Thornton's lorries became regular visitors after the Second World War. Here's the bottom of King Street from the top of the old Unity Mill chimney on Derwent Street. It's 1901, and the Horse and Trap in the middle is just turning into King Street. Beyond it is the small building which later became Leslie's Cafe on the Chapel Street junction. Next to it, behind the white fencing, was Joseph Gregory's smithy, later demolished and Woolworths built on the site. That's now Iceland. Far left, you can see the tall, impressive building of the newly completed premises of Pars Bank, which was later Nat West and is now a hairdresser's, Katie Weeds. We're on Derwent Street now. There used to be cottages lining the route to the Castle factory, which by this time was home to Thornton's. The cottages were demolished many years ago, but the loading bay here was only demolished in 2019 before the building on the far right, a former music hall called the Empire, was converted into a library for the town. Moving round to Strutt Street, here's the new road end in the 1950s before hosiery company Silcoto moved down to Derwent Street. These buildings were all demolished in the winter of 1986-87 to make way for the new Co-op supermarket. Further down New Road, this garden belonged to Brook Cottage, which survived the clearing of the Silcoline site after it closed in 1999. Brook Cottage has now been restored and is back in use, but the garden has long gone. A century ago, it was occupied by the manager of Ward, Sturt and Sharp, the hosiery company which owned the site before Dalton's bought it to refine oil in the 1930s. Along Derby Road, you come to Babington Hospital, which before the 1930s was the town's union workhouse. Here, one of the wards is dressed for Christmas before the First World War. With the nurses is Dr. Allen, the medical officer, and his son, who succeeded him in the post. Coming back into Belper along the Fleet, just after the First World War, to the right is Bayard's, later Morley's, field, and beyond the trees you can see the coppice. On the left, there's the Manor Road junction, and past that, the cottages and house that were later demolished for the building of the Flanders Hosiery Company. In the 1960s, well dressings were revived in the Fleet, but in the 19th century there were many dressings in the town for Wakes Week. As you can see from this photograph, it was something of a male activity, but unfortunately, towards the end of the 19th century, rivalry between groups, particularly with cash prizes at stake, led to sabotage and fights, so well dressings were banned to all but the convent for several decades. Heading up Chesterfield Road, we come to what was once known as Field Head, the top of the village field, which once filled the valley side down to Bridge Street. One of the most recognisable features of Field Head was the primitive Methodist chapel, built in 1822 and seen here before its demolition in the winter of 1967-68. One of the largest annual celebrations at Field Head for many years was the chapel anniversary. Here you can see members of the congregation gathered for hymn singing on the junction of Chesterfield Road and Penn Street, which you can see on the right. Looking from the other side of the road, behind the singers, is the shop of pork butcher Herbert Hobson, which was next door to the Queen's Head. Standing outside the Thorntree Public House on the Swinney Lane Junction in the 1920s are some of the older members of the Fieldhead congregation about to board a charabanc for a trip out. They even had their own St John ambulance officer with them, just in case. From Swinney Lane, we've headed down Mill Street to what was known as White City, houses built in 1912 for the Strutt estate. That's quite a crowd for what was clearly a cup win on the Acorn Recreation Ground behind the houses. The Acorn Fields were once much larger than they are today. They were once Gratian's Fields, where early commercial growing of carrots and other vegetables took place from the very beginning of the 19th century. Gratian used the raw sewage from 50 mill workers' cottages to keep the soil enriched for his crops. From here, you had an amazing view of the mill site, before the East Mill hid much of the smaller buildings from the end of 1911. The chimney of 1854 stood apart from the main mill buildings until the East Mill was built against it. Here we are in 1912, and you can see the difference the East Mill made to the view. On the left is the West Mill with its magnificent Jubilee clock tower, built in 1898 to celebrate, belatedly, the Diamond Jubilee of Queen Victoria. This is the view from the triangle just after the First World War. The 1795 gangway bridge across the road is now the oldest surviving building on the main mill site. This is a later view from the 1930s. Through the trees on the right, you can just see the fire escape which ran all the way up the South Mill. It was sometimes used for public proclamations, such as the announcement of King George V's Jubilee before a procession to the marketplace in May 1935. The view from the East Mill Water Tower in June 1959. In the foreground is the playground of Longrow School, which had been a woodyard 150 years earlier. On the far left you can see the houses of the clusters, and to the right of Bridge Street is the high chimney of Unity Mill that I mentioned earlier. A snowy view of Bridge Foot on the far side of the river bridge. Just out of view on the left is the Talbot Inn. Behind the trees on the right is the old cottage hospital set up by Agnes Strutt to serve the Belper Mills. Although with only 3 beds, it only had a limited scope. Can you see the horse trough in the distance? At one stage, in the centre of the road there was a urinal, well away from the pavements where ladies passed. It seemed a popular spot to stop your cart before heading in or out of Belper. This rather wonderful photograph, looking back towards the cottage hospital, would suggest that the urinal was sometimes very popular. They can't all be in the queue, can they? I hope you enjoyed this wander around Old Belper. Thanks for watching, and if you'd like to know more, visit the Belper Historical Society website.